Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be talking about 10 cities the UFL could expand to in the next 2 years. Now, for those of you who missed it, last week we got some huge news that the UFL was starting their expansion process, and multiple reports suggest that the goal is to add 2 teams in both 2026 and 2027 to eventually get to a 12-team league for the future. Now, with that, of course, there's a lot of questions on exactly what cities the UFL will go to. Will they bring back some of these teams that were shelved? Will they make new expansion teams? Or will they bring back legit old teams from like the original USFL? There's a lot of questions in that. And today we're just going to be talking about 10 cities that the league could expand to. Now, this is not a top 10. This is not a these are the 10 best. These are just 10, technically 13, 10 cities that they could go to. Like, if we're being completely honest, you could probably make an argument for well over 30 different cities to get a team. And yes, some cities have better arguments than others. They all pretty much still have somewhat of a decent argument up to, like, again, over 30 cities. So these are just 10 that I've come up with that I think could be legit options. So without further ado, let's get started with one of the most obvious ones, Seattle, Washington. Let me just start by saying this. The NFL argument is one that people need to get rid of. The argument that you shouldn't have a team in a city that has an NFL team makes no sense. Now, look, if your reasoning is because you want there to be football team or UFL teams in cities that don't have pro football, it's different. But if your reasoning is because of there being a pro football team, the fan base or fan support's not going to be as good, is just not right. Right? Memphis Showboats, they had the worst attendance. They don't have an NFL team. The Renegades and Defenders both would have beaten Birmingham if it wasn't for the AJ McCarron return game. So it's not like being in an NFL city is always a terrible thing, especially because a lot of these NFL cities are in huge cities, which get you better TV ratings. Like Houston having a ton of people in the city, so even a terrible rating still gets you a really solid amount of viewers. It's not a good argument, and your real argument should be for NHL, basketball, and Major League Baseball teams, since those ones actually play the same time, and that is a good segue to Seattle. 2023, the Seattle Sea Dragons saw a massive dip in attendance, right? They went from averaging over 20,000 a game in 2020 to just over 12,000 in 23. There were some reasons for this. Now, number one, of course, is that most of these teams did see decreases in their attendance, aside from like St. Louis, but the biggest issue was the scheduling. Multiple Thursday night games, multiple games at really weird times. And multiple games going head-to-head against Seattle Kraken games, which were being played at Seattle, again, NHL team. So there was a lot of issues there in the scheduling. And even then, the 12,000 mark would still be a really solid number in the UFL. When you consider the fact that like teams like the Stallions and Renegades couldn't even pull that much, that would be a really solid number to see in the UFL. Now, where they would play is pretty obvious, Lumen Field. This is where they played both in 2020 and 2023. Though I would bring back the Dragons and not the Sea Dragons. I don't know what it is, but I think me and a lot of other people agree that the Sea Dragons are just kind of a really weird and not necessary change. And the Dragons are just better, and of course, in terms of the memories, right, the Dragons had a much bigger, supportive fan base. Legitimately double more than what they got in 2023. Granted, they only had 2 home games, but still. Seattle is a pretty obvious one. Most people would agree this is one of the best cities to bring back if you decide to do a Western expansion, which of course is the biggest issue with this expansion is the distance of everything. Because the league still is going to be running that hub out of, Arlington, it means that expanding super west could be an issue, but if they are going to do it, Seattle is definitely an option. Now, the second team is going to be, or city is going to be New Orleans. Again, I wanted to get these two out of the way because these are the two most obvious, most people are going to agree with ones. New Orleans is pretty easy to say why. The Breakers had a great fan base online despite never playing in New Orleans, and even without the Breakers, in terms of the highest rated UFL markets this past year, New Orleans came in at 5th at a 1.06. They had the 5th highest TV rating despite not even having a team. And they have 2 options. Now, the one that I've been saying for the most part is the Shrine and Airline. They're supposed to be, they're going under renovation, should add some seats. Probably, I don't know exactly how much, but it's going to be over 10K. And it's, a place that, it would be a very solid place to play. Most people agree that a 20,000 seat stadium should be the max if possible because of the fact that it looks good on TV when you have 12K there. But even Yeoman Stadium is not a terrible option, which is at Tulane University. Those are the 2 options that New Orleans can play in, and they're both solid options. I would prefer the Shrine just because it could be kind of a unique thing for them. They'd be the biggest fish in that small pond. But We'll have to see exactly when that whole, pardon me, whenever that whole renovation gets finished. It should be done by 2026 though, so there shouldn't be any issue there. And Yeoman, again, is still a legit option, and especially because the Shrine already had talks with the USFL before. It just, the renovations kind of happened at a bad time. Again, New Orleans, it's pretty easy to see why. I mean, you had a really solid TV rating, big fan base online, and most people would agree that if they're going to bring back a USFL team, they either want to bring back the Maulers or the Breakers. I think the Breakers are a solid one. That's the second team. Now, third is going to be one of the split ones. I'm putting both Canton and Columbus here. A lot of people still want to see a team in Canton, but Columbus is just such an obvious play the league could do, so I'm just putting them both here. Now, Columbus is a very, very big city. It's, a huge city, over 900K people, and you really have, two different options. You have, Historic Crew Stadium and Lower.com Field, both with their own, positives and negatives. So MLS, other teams, it is what it is. You have two options. And then with Canton, you have Tom Benson Stadium. Now, Tom Benson has the advantage that, from what everybody understands, the USFL had a super great deal with the Hall of Fame to play in that stadium. And it seems that it was a very mutual benefit, with people going to the Hall of Fame while seeing a game for the USFL teams that played there. It's not a terrible option. Now, Canton itself is not a huge city, but it is in one of those places where it's, close to a few big cities, so it, could work in that sense. But again, this is one of those where it's a pretty obvious play. The league should think about going to Ohio to one of these two places. Columbus only has the Blue Jackets when you're talking about, a Big Four professional team. And so that's, of course, a very, good thing for them. But then, of course, you have, the soccer teams, which that's always the biggest issue and why people like the league to avoid MLS stadiums is because it makes scheduling a lot harder. But as we'll see later, that's not the only thing you have to worry about. But I think this is a pretty obvious play to go to Ohio, either Canton or Columbus. I agree with both arguments that Columbus, it's a bigger city, doesn't have a ton of competition. It would make sense. And then Canton, just because of the football history, going back there since you already have some ties there, it could work. Solid options for the league to go to. Number 4 is Raleigh, North Carolina. Is this a little selfish? Sure. But does this also make sense? Yes. Look, as somebody who lives in NC, I can tell you that most people in NC, and I mean central NC, not Charlotte area, would agree that North Carolina really only has one pro team, and that's the Hurricanes. The Carolina Panthers and Charlotte Hornets, for the most part, are just Carolina teams, right? They're North and South Carolina. Charlotte's one of those border cities. And yes, we have, an NWSL team, and we have even an MLS team that's also in Charlotte. So for most people, in terms of, a major pro team, it's really just the Hurricanes in Raleigh. And speaking of that, right across the street from the Lenovo Center is Carter Finley Stadium, which is probably the best place for a Raleigh team to play in just because of that. The Hurricanes fan base is really rabid out here, and adding another team right next door could be a really solid thing to do. Get, some sort of partnership going, kind of like the Cardinals have with the Battlehawks. Could be a potential thing. And again, it's just that for NC, Raleigh is in a very central area. It's, close to a lot of places, because that's the biggest issue with Charlotte. If you're not near Charlotte, you're not close to it. Raleigh's 3 hours away. The mountains are a couple hours away. The beach is a few hours away. Whereas Raleigh's a lot closer to everything, to where it's still a distance from places. But again, it's not the biggest city. Of course, Charlotte is in NC, but Raleigh's still a big city, almost 500K. It wouldn't be a bad idea to put a team here. It's another one of those areas where there's kind of some open room when you look at the UFL map, but it still fits in it because it's, on the eastern side of the country. It's near a few teams, but not super close to them. It would make sense. That's why I put Raleigh here. Number 5, Denver. I'm very shocked that nobody talks about Denver. Now, I understand that when you're talking about a West expansion, most people think fully out West. But if you just want to start a Western expansion to show that you would do it, Denver's a solid one. It is definitely going west, but it's not, going to the West Coast like a lot of other cities would be, like going to California, Seattle, Oregon, all those places. So this is a legit option. Denver is a big city. Now, you do have the issue that you have to compete against, a team in all 3 of those leagues I said you really don't want to compete against, right? You have the Avalanche in the NHL, you have the Nuggets in the NBA, you have the Rockies. Well, as of now, you're not really competing with the Rockies. Ain't nobody going to their games, but the point is you still have to deal with it. Now, the other thing is that you have a lot of options, if we're being completely honest. They all range from really good to okay. Of course, Folsom Field is probably the one you would most go to, but you have a few other ones. You have Dick's Sporting Goods Parks, you have Canvas Stadium, you have Falcon Stadium. A lot of these places are within 40 minutes of Denver or closer to that. And again, you have a lot of options. A lot of them have their own benefits, their own issues. But all in all, there's a lot of things you could do. Again, if you want to avoid those soccer teams, you would avoid Dick's Sporting Goods Park. If you want to go to one of those college stadiums, again, you have those three options to go to. So you have a lot of options to go to with Denver, which a lot of these other cities, you really only have like one or two options, but Denver, you've got like four of them. So I think this is a legit solid option league could go to. Again, it's a big city. You do have the issue of competing against the other leagues going on, but it is a place that would start a Western expansion without going fully out west, which is the biggest benefit of Denver. Now, number 6 is going to be San Diego and Oakland. Again, another one of those we were talking about 2-1s. Now, the thing that a lot of people want to say is that these are like a St. Louis type of market, which in a lot of ways, sure, right? St. Louis is a exception because of the fact that they had a team in the NFL leave, and so did both these other places. And Oakland actually had two of them leave. Now, Oakland's biggest issue is that there's really nowhere to play because the Coliseum is going to get like fully repurposed since the A's are gone. So they would have to pretty much play at California Stadium, California Memorial Stadium, which is a much bigger stadium than a lot of people would like, 63K people. And then for San Diego, it would be Snapdragon, which again also has its own issues. It has a lot of teams playing on it right now, so it's going to make the grounds crew work even harder, adding another team in it. Though a 35,000 seat stadium is not a bad idea. It's a really solid, amount. Again, it's not the sub 25K, but it's still a good amount where like getting 12,000 people in the lower sections is not going to look bad on TV. And of course, these are two big cities. San Diego's a huge city, though, one of the top 10 in this country. It's just that the issue, of course, is California, right? People need to remember that California and New York especially are really tough to put a team in because of just how much money it is to play there and have everything operate there. It's not just about travel, it's also just playing there and being there. So it's a huge reason why some people would even say to avoid both these cities and why St. Louis is such an anomaly. Because it's in a city that's big, it's in a city that has a team that left them, and it's in a city that doesn't have, the most competition. It has some, of course, the Cardinals and Blues, but it's not terrible. But these two cities, you're in California, you do have some competition still, so it's a tough one, but the argument is definitely sound in that you could get another rabid fan base potentially in one of these two places. It's just going to be harder to get there, so that's why I had to put them on here, though. Now, number 7 is going to be Louisville. This was, I believe, one of the two favorites that Larson said probably could get a team. Louisville makes a lot of sense. Louisville is also one of those teams that was very highly rated, 14th in the top 15, and it's a big city, 600K people. And you have two options. Now, L&N Stadium would be your big college football stadium, but a lot of people would say that Lynn Family Stadium is probably a better one. That's your soccer stadium there. And it's got both a benefit and a negative. Now, the benefit is that it is a 15K capacity stadium, which is really good because it's really easy to sell out or get close to a sellout. The only issue is that seating location-wise, it's only like 11.6K. So you'd have to have a lot of standing room seats or standing room, which that's the one downside. It's how many people are going to want to stand for a game is, of course, the big question. But even then, if you still get 10K out of, the 11.6 for the seating, it's still going to look really good on TV, and even then, it's still better, again, than a lot of other teams got this past year. So, it's definitely an option. So, you have a couple of options there, and Louisville doesn't have a ton of stuff going against it during that time. You still have, like, college stuff going on, but in terms of pro, it's really nothing. So, it's one of those cities that you could definitely go to, and it would make a lot of sense. So, Louisville, I definitely understand why a lot of people think that Louisville could definitely get a team. It makes sense. Again, you have two legit options if you want to go to the big college stadium or you want to go to the smaller soccer stadium. And that's, of course, always a good thing. So Louisville comes in at 7. Good TV ratings despite not having a team there. You put a team there, you're probably going to hit over a 1 in the rating. Solid number. Louisville at 7. Now, the 8th team I want to talk about is another and the last of the split ones, and that's OKC or Tulsa. Oklahoma will be a really solid place to add a team. Again, it's another one of those states that you could definitely put a team in, and it's going to make a lot of sense when you look at the UFL map. Tulsa itself almost had a 0.9 rating, came in at 10th in the top 15 household markets. OKC, much bigger city, almost 300K more. But again, TV rating wasn't as good, But the point is you still have those two options. Now, the stadiums is where it would be the biggest question mark, because with OKC, it would pretty much be like Chad Richardson Stadium, which is where this Central Oklahoma plays. That's probably where you would have to play if you're going to go to OKC. And if you're going to Tulsa, though, you have Skelly Field, which is definitely a really solid place to go to, 30K people there. So, again, the smaller stadium in a bigger city or the bigger stadium in a smaller city. I could understand both arguments. I know a lot of people want to see a team in Oklahoma City, but I do get the argument for Tulsa a bit better. They already have a really solid showing on TV. They have a better stadium you can go to. I think Tulsa would be a very solid option for the league to go to. Again, Oklahoma makes a lot of sense when you look at the UFL map. So I fully understand why people are pushing for a Tulsa team potentially. So I get it, but I figured I'd put them both here because I have seen a lot of people want an OKC team. So they go on number 8, especially because if I'm not mistaken, the Skelly Field is also where the Oklahoma Outlaws played one year in '84. So you have some history there as well, which of course is really cool to have history. Because, it would be pretty cool to bring back the Outlaws, but we'll see. They come in as the 8th team I want to talk about. The 9th is Portland, Oregon. This one is almost entirely because of Seattle. If you're going to bring back a Seattle team, well, you should be bringing back the Dragons. If you're going to bring back Seattle and put the Dragons there, you want to have at least one other team that makes sense to bring back or add, and Portland would make a lot of sense. It would be a legit West expansion. They're 3 hours apart, which is a solid, it's a distance, but it's not a super far distance, and they're both in that same northwest area. This would be perfect if you are going to add 2 teams. If you're going to add 2 teams as a West expansion, boom, Portland and Seattle. Now, Portland, you would probably play at Providence Park, which the only downside is that you've got multiple soccer teams playing there and a Disc League team, which includes MLS. So, of course, that is the one big L you have, but the MLS is the one that really matters, obviously, because of when the season is for the NWSL and all that. But for the MLS, of course, it is a big issue, but Providence Park is just like Audi Field. It's a great capacity place. It would look really good on TV with people there. Portland is a big city. It's only got the Trailblazers, so it makes a lot of sense in that regard. So I get it for the argument of the West expansion. Again, if you're not going to bring back Seattle, you're probably not bringing back Portland. Like, if it comes down to Portland or Seattle, you're going to bring back Seattle. But if you're going to do Seattle and another West team, Portland would make a great decision. So that's why I put them on here. And the last city is going to be Omaha. Now, Omaha has the major caveat of the stadium is going to be pretty tough to play in, but I put Omaha, Nebraska here. It would be cool if they were to somehow get the trademark for it, but the Omaha Nighthawks were a team in the 2010s iteration of the United Football League, which played in the fall season, and were a very popular team. Despite playing a 2012 season where 2012 was, one of those years where everybody knew the league was kind of going under, so the attendance was horrific, they still managed to get over 15K across the 3 years they played, which again, if you eliminate that 2012 season, it's a lot better. So they were a very popular team when they played, and they actually did play at Charles Schwab Field back in 2011 and 2012. It's just the issue with Charles Schwab Field is that it's going to be a pretty tough on scheduling because if you extend the schedule at any point to a July schedule, you eliminate games being played there because of the College World Series being in mid to late June. And then the Creighton Blue Jays baseball team does play here, which it's not impossible to do it. It's just, again, you'd have to play second fiddle to a baseball team there. So that is the one caveat. And your only other real option is like Werner Park, but that one is, like Lynn Family Center, but like even worse. Because instead of it being like 10K fixed seats, it's only 6,400 and with a total of 9K. So that's pretty much off the table unless you were really desperate for it there. But it could work, again, at Charles Schwab Field. Again, Omaha has a history of an alt football team being there, a very popular one. If you were to somehow get the trademark for the Nighthawks, that would be a major return, a really cool thing, and you probably would get some solid attendance numbers there. It's just, again, you'd have to play second fiddle to a baseball team, much like the MLS teams in that sense, which would suck. And you would know that if you extend the schedule, that you have those like 2.5, 3 weeks where you cannot have games there because of the World Series. But overall, I think this is a pretty solid option. Again, it's another one of those places where it would make a lot of sense to go to in a lot of ways on the map sense. So I figured this would be the 10th team to talk about. And overall, that'll do it. That was 10, really 13 different cities that the UFL could expand to. Now again, like I said, there's a lot more you could argue, right? Pittsburgh and Philadelphia for other USFL teams. Florida, mainly Tampa Bay and Orlando, you could argue. There's a few other teams out west you could argue. Other teams in California, even some other teams in other states that I haven't even talked about. There's a lot of options. Maybe a 4th team in Texas would be hilarious, but there's a lot you could do. Again, there's a lot of cities you could do, and I think that there's legitimately over 30 cities that would have a very good argument to why they would get a team and why it would be good for them. But I just want to talk about really 13 cities that I think could be solid options for the league to expand to. It'll be interesting to see what ends up happening. I know some people are expecting that they're going to announce where the expansion teams are going to go in like the championship game next year. Some are wondering if it's going to end up happening for sure or what. There's a lot of question marks. Are we going to see the 2-2, or are we just going to see the first 2 expansion teams? We don't know for sure, but one thing's for sure is that there's a lot of intrigue about what's going to end up happening, and I figured I'd throw my hat in there on talking about some teams that the league, or some cities the league could go to. So let me know down below what cities you think the UFL should expand to, and what cities you think they won't expand to, and what teams of these ones do you think are the best ones to add. Let me know down below. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, think about becoming a community member for as low as 99 cents a month. You get an exclusive video, exclusive team emojis, as well as a few other benefits. And make sure to subscribe as well, since we're getting closer to 1,000 subscribers, we are doing a giveaway. And as always, guys, have a great night.